Leonardo DiCaprio.
Miss Anne Hathaway.
Meryl Streep, the Iron Lady.
Alan Arkin in Little Miss Sunshine.
Kevin Costner.
Yes.
The King's Speech.
Birdman.
I'm Connor Old, and welcome back to another episode of Redoing the Oscars, our second ever episode. We're going to be going back once again to the Oscars another year earlier, last year 2015, this year 2014, to talk about a different category this week, Best Picture. We're going to be always talking about the main categories of acting, supporting acting, directing, picture, the kind of high level, above the line categories, but do want to mix it up every year where I think maybe there is a justice that can be redid and avenged of sorts. And now that we're 10 years away, the point of the series is to kind of look back with kind of that bird's eye view and say, okay, what if this happened? What if we move things around here? Did it deserve at the time? That's the point of this new series. Essentially, the structure of how I've been doing things is to start off with my pick of my alternative nominated pick. So last week we talked about how Matt Damon, who was nominated for The Martian but didn't win, maybe could have won that year. So we talk about an alternative nominated pick. Then I talk about an alternative unnominated pick. Was there anybody that actually didn't even get nominated? Maybe they should have won in hindsight. Give a pick there. And then at the end of the video talk about if the Academy ultimately gave the right award. Did they make the right choice? Now, the context of the series, we're redoing the Oscars, so it's not always the case, but I think what we've been finding is that's a little bit more complicated. It's tough to take away an Oscar for someone, even if you maybe like the movie, because there's a more deserving movie at the time. So it has some complications that we're running into, but I enjoyed the first episode, and it seems like you guys did too. Just feel free to comment below. I always love to hear your thoughts in terms of what your alternative pick was, whether it be the nominated one or the unnominated, and if you have any suggestions on future episodes of, talk about, 2010's Best Picture lineup or anything like that, that will be a lot of fun to hear your thoughts on it. But without further ado, let's jump into things, and let's actually start with a little bit of context. What year this was. This is the 2014 Oscars. This is the Birdman Oscars. And when I think about this year, I think about real surprises in the sense of what we thought at the beginning of the season wasn't what happened at the end of the season. I remember when Boyhood was coming out, it was a late release. It was this huge, ambitious project. There was a lot of hype around it. It felt at the time that, okay, this is going to be kind of Richard Linklater's crowning achievement moment. And it didn't really go that way. Birdman ended up sweeping a lot of the industry precursors and wins a lot of the top key prizes of directing, cinematography, writing, picture. Going into the Oscars night, there was an understanding that Birdman was going to do well, but how well was the big question. Were they going to spread out the wealth? Were they going to give Richard Linklater something or Wes Anderson something? And that just wasn't the case. It was Birdman across the board. And the interesting thing, though, was that even before the season started, the one thing that people were confident Birdman would get, Best Actor for Michael Keaton, didn't end up happening either. It went to Eddie Redmayne and his kind of real serious campaigning effort. And the supporting acting wins were pretty much standard. And then you also had Julianne Moore with her kind of It's Time Oscar, where even though not everyone loved that movie, everyone loved her and her performance, and ultimately was enough to get her an Oscar. So I think about this year, I think about the fact that we thought it was going to be Boyhood across the board, and then Michael Keaton would win for Birdman, and then it was Birdman across the board, and then Eddie Redmayne won for The Theory of Everything. So it was a little bit of a surprise Oscar season. It wasn't how we thought of things maybe going into it, but you have to think back and go, well, maybe we had it right the first time, and I'm going to talk about that here on this episode in terms of redoing the Oscars, because I was actually listening to a podcast that I'm a fan of, The Big Picture. I'm sure many of you know about it, but it's a great podcast, movie podcast, and they talked about the fact that, okay, Paul Thomas Anderson just had his moment at the Oscars. Who would you like to see it happen to next? Someone that wins director and screenplay and picture and has like a big celebratory night for one of their movies that hasn't had that yet. And I think the names that they brought up up of that I kind of connected with would be David Fincher or Richard Linklater. And this was his opportunity. This was his huge, ambitious project. He'd been working for a long time. The Before trilogy had come out, and it was kind of his moment of celebration, theoretically. And he ended up not winning any Oscars, and he's still kind of kicking that around. But we're going to redo that today and talk about maybe why Richard Linklater's Boyhood makes sense, as well as an alternative nominated pick, and then figure out if it was ultimately the right choice. But going into this episode, I was kind of debating. I think 2014 was a solid year, and the reason why I ultimately chose Boyhood is because I think it's somewhat underappreciated by certain people. What I thought was notable was that the New York Times did a top 100 list of the best movies of the 21st century. Grand Budapest Hotel, which was also nominated this year, which is a movie I love and thought about doing. That was number 22 on the critics list, and Boyhood was number 23. So back to back, the critics see them very similarly. But on the public, the readers list, Grand Budapest Hotel was in the exact same position, 22. Boyhood was at 75. Boyhood moved 50 positions. Now, still well respected and made the top 100, didn't fall off, but it goes to show you, I think, that Wes Anderson's a bigger filmmaker still. Grand Budapest Hotel is clearly more well-liked within the readers of the New York Times. And I think that makes sense to the general public, which is why I wanted to do this episode on Boyhood. Because everyone knows Wes Anderson is great and Grand Budapest Hotel is a great movie, but this is my kind of pebble on the sand of a giant beach of support, and just kind of putting in my thoughts of, actually I do think Boyhood should be considered one of the best movies of this year, and it should be considered, and it's not only a good movie, but an important movie and an achievement of a movie, while also understanding why some people don't necessarily totally engage with the movie. So let's talk about now more my thoughts on the film. My alternative unnominated pick to win Best Picture at the 2014 Oscars would be Boyhood. And I do that because I was the perfect age pretty much to watch this movie. I had, I think, very similar childhood experience growing up as Eller Coltrane's character in the film. In terms of the time period, in terms of the age difference, in terms of a lot of the similarities. Now, not everything. There's definitely some differences within it. So I think I have an understanding, a complicated understanding of, I think this is actually a genuinely important and distinct and well-made movie. And yet I also kind of understand that I have a personal bias where I just have a greater connection to this individual character because of the time period that it was taking place. But if you don't know, this is a movie that was shot over the course of 12 years, kind of reconvening every few years to film a different scene in which we can actually see the characters grow up in real time. And it's about just the childhood of this boy and his dealing with his parents' divorce and growing up and dealing with bullies and just kind of a regular, everyday, run-of-the-mill, average American young boy in the 2000s. And what I think is so great about it, I have personal connections to it, of course, but I do think it is actually an achievement. That, yes, it was, I'm sure, difficult to film over the course of 12 years, but I'm not saying that as the achievement part. I'm not saying the external aspects. If you take a movie like Birdman, people go, oh, it was shot in one take and how difficult that must have been. That's almost like an external reason why you would like the movie. But what about the content of the movie itself? Does it make sense for that movie? I think mostly yes, but what's interesting about Boyhood is, yes, I understand that it probably was very difficult to get 12 years of footage and wait and be patient and to finally film it at the end of the day. But what I think is actually more interesting is the fact that that achievement is so impactful on screen, that ultimately it does affect the content of the movie, that there is a real power in seeing the same boy grow over the course of the film, and it has an extra set of weight where you can see the exact same actors grow over the course of these 12 years, in these, particularly for the kids, because they're in these critical moments of their lives of being these little kids to now being young men. It is this huge shift, and it is powerful just to see on screen. So the experiment does really pull off, not only in the impressiveness of, wow, I can't believe they filmed that, but also in the content of the movie. Also, it makes the movie better and more impactful. And then you have the fact that Richard Linklater, I think, is the best kind of realist storyteller of his era. When I think about the 2010s, even though this movie was mostly shown in the 2000s, when I think about 2010s films, this feels like a glass of water in the desert. So many 2010s films are the era of superhero movies, the era of fantasy, the era of not really engaging in modern day life, of not engaging in cell phones and social media. A lot of filmmakers didn't know what to do with that. So to find just a film that's just about every kind of regular day life and how fashion changed in the 2000s and how people grow up and regular everyday stuff. It does feel like an important capsule of this time period that is notable, and I think will be hopefully well remembered in the future, at the very least, as like, this is what this period was like. This is what an average boy in the kind of 2000s growing up would have ended up turning out like. But at the end of the day, stripped of all the kind of grandiosity of the ambition of the film, it's still a Richard Linklater movie, and Richard Linklater is one of the best writers, I think, working, for sure, definitely as a filmmaker. And what I love about his movies is that there's a beauty in the matter of the fact. There's a poetry in a lot of his films, not in the sense of using a bunch of big words and flowery language. It is matter of fact. It is simple and true. It feels like a therapist or someone who's gone to therapy for 10 years, boiling down the reason for their trauma in one kind of clean sentence. Feels like Linklater is able to kind of condense the human experience and some of these key moments into these very simple, matter-of-fact, true, honest, and clear moments. And that's what I love so much about his movies, and Boyhood is filled with that. Yes, I can have a personal connection to it because I'm a similar age and gender to the main protagonist during this time period, but I do hope and think it does connect with a lot of other people because of the kind of general broad strokes of coming of age, of being bullied, of being, realizing that your parents are real people, or having struggles with them, or understanding that they have their own kind of ambitions as well, or, having your first crush. Like, there is some kind of standard, I think, true and honest moments of growing up that hopefully will appeal to a lot of different types of people. And in some of that writing, you realize Linklater's magic. It is kind of this perfect marriage of him understanding the American everyday life, and then, okay, let's film it over 12 years to actually make sure that emphasis and that emotional connection is so powerful. But what's interesting is that, yes, I have a personal connection to the main character, but I also think that there are, especially as you watch the movie over and over, the side characters and the other characters that you really start to appreciate, and that there are multiple elements, and that, Patricia Arquette's character is a character that I start to understand more and more as I see the movie. Even the kind of the complexity of someone like Ethan Hawke's character, and the fact that, Elric Coltrane's character has to watch his dad essentially restart his life, and has a different part of him, and the dad he knows is not necessarily the dad he had eventually become, and the change of that man. And you realize just the kind of ensemble of characters and different types of people at different stages of their life. It is this kind of beautiful and I think well-realized capture of a lot of people's experiences, and also the complexities of people, which is why I think it makes it such a rich text to go back to, because yes, I can connect to that main character, and I'm sure many people can from a general coming of age point of view, but it's the other characters that I still continue to return to and see more of their sides and start to understand more as I grow. And hopefully, the movie will grow with me as I grow up and, start to experience different things that they do. So it is, I think, a real rich text. It's understandable, I guess, that maybe not a lot of people connected with it at the time. I do think it's maybe fallen out of favor, as you can see within something like the Reader's List, but I do think it's an achievement, not necessarily in terms of the production and how impressive that was, but what they were able to achieve on screen, having the actual characters, the same actors, age within this 2.5 hour block, is impressive and does have, I think, an extra added effect of the feeling that you've been on this journey with these characters. So Boyhood, I think, is a very special movie. I could have gone with Whiplash or Grand Budapest Hotel, which I think are other great movies, but ultimately wanted to give a shout out to Boyhood. I still think it's up there with some of the best movies of the century. And if you haven't seen it in a while, give it a shot. I rewatched it again for this episode, and once again, just blown away by the kind of simple beauty in the matter of fact, which is so powerful. But now talking about my alternative, an unnominated pick, a movie that didn't get nominated at the 2014 Oscars for Best Picture that I think should have, definitely, and maybe probably should have even won. A movie I also have a personal kind of obsession over, which is Nightcrawler. And this was a tough one as well. I thought about maybe going with Interstellar, which is a movie I absolutely love, and of course has stood the test of time. Other great movies like It Follows also happened this year. Guardians of the Galaxy is one of my favorite superhero movies. So I think this was a really good year. But the truth is, when I think about my favorite movies from that year and movie that I still really connected with, it is Nightcrawler. Is it as good as maybe something like Interstellar? I don't know, but I do have this intense personal obsession over it, and did at the time, and I can't deny that fact. And recently picked up the 4K Shout Blu-ray that they came out with, and it looks absolutely fantastic, except for the cover art. Cover art doesn't look too fantastic, but the movie itself looks great. And where Boyhood was a great ensemble with many different great characters, Nightcrawler is a character piece. It is the story of Lou Bloom, played by Jake Gyllenhaal, and his quest to become successful. In the case of this time, doing freelance video news and recording crime scenes and then selling them to the news stations. And so much of what I love about the movie is the character of Lou Bloom and how Jake Gyllenhaal performs him. So many moments throughout the entire movie, he essentially doesn't blink. Jake himself already has these really big brown eyes, and he keeps them open throughout the entire movie and just locks in on so many of the other characters. And we see the characters be uncomfortable by this kind of social interaction point of view, but us, the audience, also become kind of uncomfortable as he has this deadpan, straight stare, look into the camera in so many of these instances. He is like a wolf watching a campfire from far away, waiting to strike. And Jake brings a lot of that complexity to it. And what is so interesting about the movie is that you just have a very interesting character at the center with a very interesting performer making very interesting choices. And all of a sudden you're just engaged. And who is this guy? And why is he so weird? And what are the oddities? And he has these violent outbursts, but then he has other moments when he's very kind of OCD, but then he's clearly read some corporate books, and he's trying to incorporate some of this corporate language or business book language into the freelance world, and there's clearly a clash there. But you kind of admire his kind of maybe autism or just his general kind of ambition for wanting to have a better life, but you understand that clearly something is wrong in the back of his mind, and you don't know how to read him, and none of the characters know how to read him. But that's what makes him so fascinating. And I think Gyllenhaal's actually able to get on a wavelength of odd, of strange. And you actually believe that this is a character, a real life person. It's a person brought to life. It doesn't feel like an acting tick. It feels like they found this really strange guy and we're just following him and his crazy, unfiltered ambition for being successful. And it's incredibly compelling. And then I love the supporting cast as well. Rene Russo, the great Bill Paxton, do a great job. This is an early Riz Ahmed performance. Probably the first time I saw him, I thought, who is this guy? He's really great. And then I think Dan Gilroy's script is very tight and very cutting. There's some great lines and moments of kind of what it takes to be successful in this news business, the cutthroat ratings focused news business, and what you're kind of willing to sacrifice and who has leverage. So much of the movie is about kind of power dynamics and relationships as it is about kind of murky ethics. And there is a lot of, I think, deep, rich, the fact that it's just an interesting idea. Let's talk about these guys who film these crimes, but instead of making it a documentary, you make it kind of like this dark thriller and this blurring of lines of ethics. And when you have this main character who's willing to do whatever it takes and is so odd and strange, it helps us, I think, get into this world of, we're not necessarily rooting for this guy, we're just fascinating in it. And that's what I think about the movie, is that I became so obsessed with it, especially when I was younger, is I think it's so fascinating. It's like, this isn't a real guy, this is a weird guy, and this is a weird world, and we're just going down this road, and this filmmaker is going headfirst and doesn't have any real time to debate morals and ethics. It's like, this is the events of things that are happening. And by telling it the story, what it does, instead of trying to confront the morals and ethics of what's right and wrong, it just says, this is the story, we're going down this path. We recognize maybe that this is a steep climb, or a steep kind of a drop into morals and ethics, but our main character doesn't care at all. So what that ends up is reflecting it back onto the viewer. And when you realize just the extent of what he's willing to do, you start to question your own ethics and morals and what you would do. So in a way, the fact that the movie, I don't think, is very preachy as to what the right or the wrong thing is. What it does, though, is like any great movie, it rings the bell. It rings the bell of themes and ideas, and the movie starts when you leave the movie. It's, wow, look where he ended up. Would I do that? What does that say about corporate America? What does that say about the news business? What does that say about people we put towards the outcasts? What does that say about these people, these sociotype people that are really driven, and these people exist, and you have to interact with them, and there's so much kind of fascinating elements. But I'm surprised Jake Gyllenhaal didn't get a nomination, even though this wasn't a big Oscar movie. I think it's one of the best performances of the decade. And still, even though I love Boyhood, maybe this is my favorite movie of the decade. It's a really great year and had a lot of strong personal connections to a lot of different movies, but this one felt similar to Boyhood, maybe a little bit underrated. It's not as big as Guardians of the Galaxy or Interstellar, but still equally, I think, as fascinating. And that descent of ethics and obsession and the odd tics that Jake Gyllenhaal brings to his character is just, to me, endlessly fascinating. But to wrap things up now, did the Academy get it right? I'm going to say definitively no. Birdman is a movie I like and I've seen multiple times, and I do enjoy the movie. But looking back on things, I think the fact that a movie like Interstellar, which is a generational movie for a lot of people, the fact that it didn't even get nominated is a crime. Whiplash, I think, is a beloved movie. It not winning, even Grand Budapest Hotel, Boyhood, would be upset if a Linklater or Wes Anderson had an Oscar, or another Damien Chazelle, or if this was Nolan's kind of big Oscars moment. I don't think anyone would be necessarily at the time. And there's a lot of great movies. So Birdman, it feels like a solid, good movie, but does it feel as important and culturally significant as some of the others? I don't think so. Personally, my pick of the nominated ones would be Boyhood, but I could see an argument for a lot of the other different ones. So I ultimately do think that if we were redoing the Oscars 10 years from now, we may have chose a different movie than Birdman. Just seems like that's a movie that was good and appealed directly to the Academy's tastes of critics and acting and performance, and the comeback of Michael Keaton was so enticing. But maybe as a movie itself, or in the context of where we were at the time, something else that maybe stands the test of time a little bit more would be a little bit more engaging, not necessarily requiring that added context of meta element that the movie succeeded on. But that's about it. I hope you enjoyed the video. Make sure you comment below. I'd love to hear your thoughts. What's your pick for the Best Picture category? Would you have picked another category? Do you think that maybe the Julianne Moore Oscar isn't that good? I'd love to hear all that stuff in the comments down below. And stay tuned to next week. We're going to be covering the 2013 Oscars. You'll have to stay tuned in terms of what category I'm going to be talking about there. But it will be a fun one for sure. But that's about it. Until next time, stay tuned.